So welcome to the storytelling workshop. Goes my brain. I've already lost it. Sponsored by the New Ulm Public Library. I'm Leroy Oscar Tanner. I'm the programming librarian, and we're happy to have you with us. We are with author author Christopher D. Schmitz. He's the author of over 40 books, primarily of fantasy and science fiction. Okay, we've got a couple more people joining us now. Excellent. And specifically, he is the author of the book set in the world of Esfa for the Dragon Dice game originally made by TSR, who were the creators of modern role-playing games, as it were. So we're very excited to have Christopher here. Just real quick, some norms for Zoom. Make sure that when you're not speaking, that you have your microphone muted so we don't get feedback. But I guess Christopher will talk about how he'd like you to interact as we get into things. So I'll go ahead and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. I'm author for Chris. That would actually be a great, what do they call that? Nom de plume. If I ever needed to hide some, that could be how I hide my tax dollars from all of my massive book sales, right? There's not massive book sales. There never is. The cake is a lie. So maybe you get the reference, since I'm assuming many of us here are gamers. TSR. I needed a graphic that I'm going to show you guys a little later on, and I couldn't remember the details on it, where to get it, and so I actually found I participate in a group online. Excuse me, a Facebook group of old school TSR gamers. I'm like, hey guys, I saw a funny meme about somebody's campaign. It was like this. Can somebody put it out to me? And 30 seconds later, I had that, and people giving me just a flood of funny Dungeons and Dragons related memes. And if that's your cup of tea, find your weird group, and they will keep you laughing all day. So anyway, yeah. So I write in the world of Espa. It's a high fantasy series. So back in the day, in the late 70s and moving forward, in the TSR D&D days, they had Forgotten Realms, they had Dragonlance, they had some other books that were kind of loosely affiliated with like Dory Hine, and DJ Heinrich was the name that she wrote under. She wrote her gaming stuff, I think, under Dory Hine. That name's familiar just because I'm staring at a book that she wrote sitting across my room. But Lester Smith, who was on staff at TSR, wrote created a game called Dragon Dice, which you may remember from its heyday in the 90s. They just were huge. It was like the biggest game for 3 years, drowning out Magic the Gathering. And then overnight, TSR folded, and just overnight the game almost disappeared. Sold to Wizards of the Coast, was bought by some fans before the days of crowdfunding, and before Kickstarter and all of that. And some fans purchased it, got all the IP from Wizards of the Coast after they had dug a giant hole, I think probably right next to all the ET cartridges out in the desert from the Atari 2600, and buried half of the stock. And all these gamers whoa, don't throw away something we love. And kept the game alive, added a whole bunch of additional expansions. And I had approached them in Gen Con a few years ago after a few online conversations, and I had this idea. I said, the reason that D&D stuck around wasn't just because it was a solid game, because if you look back in the days like THACO and all of the other gaming related, there was some stuff that it just didn't really make a lot of sense. So the game has evolved and improved, which is good. Any game should do that. But it was by far not a perfect system. But I believe that what kept it alive was that there's narratives that people could incorporate into their, that connected with them. So when you look at Dragonlance, when you look at Forgotten Realms, people became attached to the characters that were in this world and saw bits of themselves in those characters and wanted to emulate some of those things in their own games that they played. So I'm not sure how many of you guys are game players, if you guys play RPGs or not, or even just tabletop games where you can get kind of a sense of that. But we're going to talk a little bit about world building, about fantasy, about storytelling, and this will maybe help if you're working on writing in your own fiction or storytelling. Role-playing games are primarily a storytelling game. And so we're going to talk about that's going to be a huge part about what we talk about. And so if you're not familiar with role-playing game terminology, I just want to bring you up to speed and throw it out there. A campaign is like the story. It's maybe like the book. Like let's think of Lord of the Rings, right? Like a campaign might be Fellowship of the Ring. And within the Fellowship of the Ring, you've got many different chapters. I think Fellowship of the Ring has a couple of books broken out within it. So there will be many big segments within that whole system. But a campaign is the overall tale in essence. So when you hear that word, that you'll now know what that means, what I'm talking about. I do want to, because I know, Leroy, you probably know I'm big on props. When I was looking for that book in the previous video we were doing, for the Writer's Market, that's the name of it, Writer's Market. I kept saying it wrong. But behind a stack of books, as I was looking, I spotted this nondescript masking tape little book here. This was how I got started in fantasy. You can kind of see some faded green writing in the front. That says discard. The cover was torn off. This is a 1970s version of The Hobbit. And this was my introduction to the Lord of the Rings. Let me see. This is copyright 1973. So this is the 1973 Ballantine version in its 48th printing. So had been around for a while. And this was probably, so my father and mother, they were not big fantasy people, with a few exceptions. If you saw me speak at the Red Dragon gaming shop previously, most of them having to do with my mother's crush on Val Kilmer. But my dad wasn't even a big reader, but he did say at one point that he had read The Hobbit. And I suspect this was the same copy of The Hobbit that my dad probably read, was property of the public school where he went, and I eventually went later on when I was older. So fantasy had been with me for many years, and I've read that book cover to cover many times. But we're going to talk about a few different things today, mainly through the lens of gaming. Like I said, if you're not an RPG gamer, that's fine. Some of these are going to be some universal concepts. We're going to talk about storytelling and plot outlining, character creation, some world building stuff. And specifically, let me share with you a little video here about world building. That's a topic I get asked to speak about a lot at different conventions and at writing workshops, because I write fantasy. I write several different fantasy series, and within most of them, I have to employ world building, and I often call it I call myself a mythopic author. So mythopic is like the whole world building concept that Tolkien did. Tolkien had books and books and books filled with information on his background, his everything that goes on in his world, everything from weather to the creatures within it, to their histories, to their heroes, to their politics, to their money. Even I was watching Lord of the Rings with some teenagers. I'm a youth worker by trade. I got some junior high boys I work with in an after school group. They'd never seen Lord of the Rings, so I said that's got to change. And just the little things, like at the end of the two towers, there's apples floating by, and they find two barrels of old Toby, the finest leaf from the Shire, and they're, it's a big part of the culture of the hobbits. All those are little world building things that are thrown in that we relate to, because as humans, we all have our own culture. It surrounds us, even in your workplace. You could be flipping burgers at McDonald's, or you could be pushing paper at Dunder Mifflin, and your work group surrounding you has their own culture. All these things, from the flavors in the work refrigerator or off the menu that you serve, to the flavors of the people that you work with. I don't mean that cannibalistically, but here is a link in the chat. This is part one. If you were with us, an hour and a half ago, I talked about, I mentioned that at the St. Paul Public Library, I gave us a talk at their ToshoCon, which is a small kind of comic convention for local creators there. This one is specifically about world building and fantasy. And D&D is fantasy. Pathfinder is fantasy. Very many games, role-playing games, are in fantastic settings, in fantastic worlds. And not all of them. A lot of the games that I enjoyed growing up, I grew up playing TSR's Marvel Superheroes role-playing game, which was, I have broken that out on occasion with some of our junior high boys, and because superheroes are great. It's fun. I am a superhero in my own mind, and I think probably most of us are. But it was just a very simple 2D10 system, but let us live out our fantasies of being a hero, stopping crimes, being Spider-Man or Thor or Wolverine, or Captain America. You could even create your own. There was rules for that. I play mostly Pathfinder with my kids, which is a D&D 3.5, I believe, variant. It's a little more specific. Modern D&D, I think, is 4.0, or maybe it's 5.0 now. 5, okay. It's a little more simple. It's easier, but we play Pathfinder in my group because they're you can get all of the rules and everything for free online, and because I serve mostly underprivileged kids, I want them to be able to have that free access just anywhere where they can get online. They can look up answers to questions that they might have. They can roll up their own characters. They can level their characters. They can do all these different things that might be vital to them in their story, from the character creation standpoint, and it's free for them. Other systems I used to love playing, the old White Wolf systems. World of Darkness systems, which is owned by White Wolf. So Werewolf the Apocalypse, Vampire the Masquerade, Mage the Changeling. There was like a whole bunch of them, and which is cool. Dust out your books, because that system is due for a comeback. They released a big video game recently in an MMORPG that looks phenomenal. And if any of you guys ever want to break out some old school 1990s Rage CCG, the good one, not the Rage Against Las Vegas one the second version they made, the first one, I am always down for a game. So find me. I'll drive an hour to go get my butt kicked at some old school Rage. That would be great. So World of Darkness, and what was great about that system was that you've got a whole rule book for if you want to play as the werewolves, and they got this great all this great world building stuff, like why they are fighting against the bad guys, the worm, and the worm wasn't just some big bad worm, like in Dune's sandworms. It was, this this multifaceted, like, evil entity with 3 different faces that could come at you, and all these different, there's the worm and the weaver and the other one. And it's been a while since I played. But evil was not so simple. And then there was also, I mean, there was the vampires with their own agendas. And maybe you were a sympathetic vampire and you weren't quite as evil, as being a straight up ally of the worm. So there was this whole, when they present themselves as the world of darkness, it wasn't just like because, oh, it's dark and gritty. It's because there's a world. There's a whole world out there to explore, to create, with its own history. And that's something that you want to be aware of. Now, you cannot give all of the history in some big info dump or download. You can't do it, because first of all, you're gonna bore everybody to tears. You can feel free to give me an applause or a thumbs up or whatever you got access to for your tools on Zoom, if you agree. But man, I love Legend of Zelda, and I hate cutscenes that you cannot fast forward through. Thank you for the thumbs up, right? Especially if you're playing through the second time because you want to speed run it or something. But there's nothing worse than having to sit there in Ocarina of Time and there's a big owl. Whoo! Oh, the owl, he's going to tell you all of the backstory. It's like, oh God, this is 45 minutes when I thought I was going to be playing the game. And yeah, it's great to know the backstory, but I've been playing Legend of Zelda since I was 7. So like the original gold cartridge on the NES, man. I'm just like, I don't need to know more about the world. I mean, yeah, it's probably going to be somewhat helpful, but can you maybe not make me sit through 45 minutes of, of like, it pops up, click A. Okay, you got to keep clicking it because it knows that you need more time to read it than you gave it. Yeah, that's my rant. But don't info dump on your players all this information. You want people to experience, especially in a role-playing game. It's an immersive experience. So you want to play on your senses. Tell people what it smells like. So I live over here in Redwood Falls, and something we're known for in Redwood Falls is where what we now have as Redwood Falls is a combination of 2 towns. There's Redwood Falls and there's North Redwood Falls. They're now just one after we merged, but even I think 10 years ago there were maybe 2 of them. But North Redwood Falls was the home of, I believe it was the guy who started Sears. It was either Sears or J.C. Penney. I forget which, but we're famous for that. But North Redwood is like, it's like 150 people. Like there's nothing there except an old rail line that used to go through, which is why there was a town there to begin with, like a million years ago. In North Redwood is a rending plant. So you'll often see semis driving through with no top on them, just a big box, and like arms and legs sticking out, animal arms and legs, not like people arms and legs, but not usually. But yeah, especially like bloated deer that have been dead in the side of the road, like legs are sticking straight out because rigor mortis is set in. So you can imagine the smell when one of these trucks drive by. Well, what they do at a rending plant is they take all of those carcasses and they throw them in these like giant vats or burners, and they like melt them down to get like oils and stuff, and they'll make certain chemicals and certain types of feed and stuff out of them, because like hogs and stuff will eat that, and whatever's left over, they kind of shove. This is whatever's left over. Actually, they make half of that into hot dogs at Oscar Mayer, and then the other half they shove into the furnaces, and they burn it, and we get a very distinct smell, especially on a hot day. So you want to describe that in a role-playing setting rather than just talk about the you smell a bad smell. Well, no, it's like I would describe this to my role players. I'd be like, I see you're walking through the hills, and there's a hot wind coming out of the north, hotter than the dark, or than the intense heat and humidity that you're experiencing already on a hot August evening. And the smell of dead bodies, and then describe the smell just like whatever you would, like rotting flesh that's been heated up and buried before being suddenly unearthed. Like that's, oh yeah, that's that rending plant. So you want to engage the senses, and very often as gamers and as storytellers, we rely on that sense of sight, and that's not always the best thing to use. Don't tell us what we're seeing. Tell us what we're experiencing. In many games, I mentioned Marvel superheroes. I mentioned World of Darkness, which would have like mage and some of these things with like where you'd have like psychics. You you have psychics and psionics in Dungeons and Dragons, in Pathfinder. I would guess as well in Starfinder. But that's a whole extra sense that we don't even use. Many people may believe or not believe in it. That's not up for me to decide for you, but just the idea that this is something that exists in the game as a whole extra sense. Engage those senses. Let me jump over to my notes, because I know I wrote a note about this. So I like Lovecraftian games do this very well. Lovecraft writes all about fear and going crazy. Like I love the board game Arkham Horror. So I don't do a lot of role playing in this specific situation, with few exceptions. We have thrown in the occasional Lovecraftian monster in some of our higher level Pathfinder campaigns, which is always great. But so we were discussing in Pathfinder, and I think they had a version of this at least at one point for D&D. There's a very famous campaign called Rise of the Runelords, which is as far as some of the newer stuff out there. I mean, it's highly recommended. I've run it a couple times, and we are at the very top. Actually, no, I'm sorry, not Rise of the Runelords. Rise of the Runelords is great. That's a great campaign. There's another big one called it's called the Emerald Spire, and it's a little lesser known, but the Emerald Spire will take your character from level 1 up through max. It'll take you up to level 20 if you hit all of the quests and side quests. So in this, though, there's the top level. You go into this castle, and there's a castle and a tower that's broken, like it should be for a kind of a horrific type of campaign. You have to fight these nasty, terrifying goblins. Leroy's laughing. Goblins are pretty easy. They're a lot less easy when there's a supernatural darkness, some kind of a spell cast on the castle, so you cannot see them, and you can't see further than 5 feet in front of you, which means they're probably going to goblins are going to be shooting you in the dark and whacking you, and they get a whole lot more intimidating. The same thing will be said of traps. Traps are a whole lot more terrific when it's dark. So I have a player who she's been playing with us about a year, and she kind of came on as one of my volunteers, my adult volunteers for this youth program I work with, where we do a lot of gaming with kids. And she there was 5 in the party, and she walks through a trapped area. And part of it, she's the tank, so she's a kind of a stock fighter, and I believe they're level 4 at this time. So running through what should be a level 1 campaign, figuring they're going to get down easily through level, the level 2 of the dungeon, and before stat wise things start to catch up and becomes difficult again. But sometimes gamers will make the worst human decisions ever. And if you ever played more than one RPG, you will probably have encountered some of that. So light was cast on her armor, and she walks through this trap that collapses behind her and it locks her in this room. And she's just a stock fighter, not a lot of skills, not a lot of points towards anything except for point and smash. So she's locked in this thing, and I read off for everybody the description for the light spell. and it expires after a couple of hours, because it's based on, lasts so many minutes per level. And so after so long, so she looks around, does I give her a perception check, and she does not see that there's a hidden tunnel that has been obscured, because she has very few skill points. That is not what she's built for. She's built for crushing goblins, not for exploring the home of goblins. So she fails the check. The party's trying to clear the rubble, but it's like a 2-day project. There's that much rubble. It was a big trap. It was a big area effect trap. And she winds up the spell, she's doing a really good job at role playing. And remind me about this, because I need to come back to the idea of what role playing is. And so she's starting to kind of freak out, like, guys, the light's getting dim. You guys got to get me. And she winds up trapped inside there for like 2 days before in fact, her party has given up on her. She can't even hear them except for just kind of dull, muffled voices. And they go away because the party is mostly neutral characters. And they're like, well, it is what it is. And half of them decide they're just going to abandon her, which is what makes it so long to clear the rubble. And so she winds up getting a permanent fear of the dark. That as the DM, I'm like, hey, whenever you're in the dark, you're going to have the fear condition if you don't have light on you. And I recommend give consequences to your players. There are consequences in life, and yes, this is a game, but games emulate life. So let me jump back to this idea of role playing, because we're also talking about storytelling. Storytelling is role playing. I mean, is shared storytelling. We are telling a story. We are kind of in control of the ebb and flow and of steering it, but we shouldn't be looking to just force players to jump from space to space. I mean, this is not Candyland. If that's the kind of game you wanted, you go to any neighborhood Goodwill, you'll find a copy of Candyland for a quarter, and you'll be happy with it. This game is about telling stories that we can relate to, and whether or not it's just a silly story, maybe it's just goofy and it's fun. But sometimes those things will reveal things about ourselves, and we can really grow. Now, if you need an example of this in a hilarious kind of way, look up the IT Crowd. It's a British comedy, and it's the episode titled Jen the Fredo, like Fredo, like the guy from Godfather Part 2. Anyway, so she's got to take these business clients out and impress them, and she winds up like totally mixing everything up, and all of these high class professional business guys in suits wind up in the basement of the office playing D&D with the IT crew. The guys that fix the computer. And at the end, the guys are all like crying, like, no, it's just like my relationship with whatever. The lady kind of like all this. It's very cathartic. But it's hilarious. So there is a room in gaming for humor, especially British style humor, because that stuff's hilarious. But let me see if I can find. Yes, okay. You probably all seen this meme before, right? How most D&D groups begin versus how they end. It is okay. It is fun to play Lord of the Rings. It is fun to get your Gimli or Aragorn on. But most of us wind up a whole lot more like the group on the bottom than the group on the top. And that is okay. Let there be space for humor. At the end of the day, when you're sitting around years later with some of your gamers, they are probably going to remember more the funny times that they had together than the really deep, like introspective. It takes too long to get to trying to move somebody, and also it's kind of dishonest. Like, we're playing a game, man. I don't want you poking around in my inner workings. Now there are times when asking some of those questions are let me see here. Okay, yeah, there are some times when asking those questions are appropriate. And sometimes you want to create moments and space for that in the game, because that develops not just our character, but the characters in the game. And coming back to Rise of the Rune Lords, there is an example of that in the first episode of Rise of the. There's a scene where after you've established yourself in the game as kind of local heroes, so by about the second play session or so, if they're shorter sessions, I believe it's chapter 2. It's I think Gresgert, I think, is the name of a goblin who is hiding beneath the floorboards in a child's room, because in scene 1, when you open, there's these goblins attacking town, and you've got to defend the town, and you wind up as heroes. And there's a little boy that you meet. You actually meet his mom. He's like, "Can you guys, like, my son looks up to you guys. Can you come and talk?" He keeps saying that there's a monster in his, living in his closet. Can you come and tell him there's no such thing as monsters? And he looks up to you. He'd believe you. And then you find out there is a monster in his closet. He's living in a crack under the floorboards. And when you walk in, like, the monster is like, has just killed his father and is dragging his body down into the crack in the hole, because Gresgert has been there, like, unable to eat for days and days and is starving, and finally, like, went out and killed the kid's father in front of him. And, like, it's a moment like, whoa, this could bring up some emotions. And so there's like a little trigger warning in the rule book, like, hey, if your gamers are going to be very sensitive to this, or this isn't the appropriate setting for them, maybe make it the family dog or something, because goblins hate dogs in Pathfinder. But they're like, your audience too. This may create a great moment for character development as well as personal development, but also don't push too far that you're going to break something. You don't want to alienate your players either, or your readers. So, like, if you're reading or if you're writing a story, coming back to the idea where storytelling isn't limited to just books or to video games, you don't want to throw out some wild stuff. So I'll give you an example. A publishing company that I was with, I won't name them, but one of my popular books, which is now under my line, was published under, a publisher out of Texas, and I was doing some work with them, and I also do some audio work and have done some audiobooks. And they had asked me if I would be willing to do some of their other books from other authors, and I said, yeah, I can do it. Here's kind of what my rates are, and so we came to an agreement on that. They gave me a book. I'm like, yeah, pirates are cool. I like pirate stories. I'm doing this pirate book, and there's a scene that makes me very uncomfortable to read. I'm not a guy who uses a lot of profanity or anything, but I'm like, this is somebody else's story. All right, I'm reading it. And then I'll just say yeah, I get it. Pirates committed a lot of acts of rape, but I begin to feel this whole book is just an excuse to write a lot of rape scenes with gratuitous profanity. And I called the publisher. I'm like, hey guys, I can't complete the story for you. I'm about a third of the way done, and it is just not getting any better. I can't do that. I'm not willing to read this book and have my children or kids that I work with or future grandkids like, oh, there's a book that Grandpa did, and like, wow, Grandpa's got a potty mouth. There's a lot of gay rape in this book. I'm like, not gonna be. I can't lend my voice, because I know some people would listen to it because they're my audience. I'm like, that's gonna kill my audience, because they know that's just, if I have to, if there's a scene that a story demands something like that, there are ways to skirt around that without throwing it in somebody's face, because that's the comfort level of my audience. Now, maybe you enjoy a good old pirate rape scene. That's between you and the pages. But that's not something I want to be involved in. And a prime example of this, if you remember Brandon Lee in The Crow, one of my all-time favorite movies. It was great the way you knew that this guy, he's an avenging spirit come back from the dead, whose wife was raped and murdered in front of him. And he comes back and revisits the horrors that these people have done to countless other people in the city, to the bad guys. So essentially the bad guys get their own, and he takes down this huge drug syndicate in the process. It's a very dark, based on a very dark comic book series, and it was great, and it was very well done. Even to the point, like I remember I was like a teenager when it came out, and I even watched it with my mother in the room. The same necessarily can't be said about the sequel, which did not pan away from some of the scenes, and there is some very weird sex type stuff going on in a scene. I'm sitting there, it's like, don't make eye contact with my mother. Like, it's gonna get weird. Like, just like you don't even want to reach for the remote and fast forward it, but you know that that's the right call at this point. Or and sometimes those instances are funny and that's intentional. I got a call from my father after watching the first Deadpool. He took my sister to see it, who was like probably 18 or 19 at the time. He's like, yeah, there's that one scene was really uncomfortable to be sitting next to my daughter in the theater with. You'll all remember that scene. It's why Ryan Reynolds goes, nope. Yeah, that's the one. So anyway, we'll move on from this topic. Let me go back to my notes. Oh yeah, I was saying let the humor exist, because that's the things that we really remember the best. Because games are about a good time, having a good time, and being together with our friends, especially in role playing games. For instance, here's a story, and you may be familiar with this story. It's the story of the tale of Eric and the Dread Gazebo. And sometimes this is one of those great scenes where just people overthink stuff. And sometimes that's great, because my players do this all the time. Like, oh, Chris is just trying to TPK the whole party, which I don't think I've ever. Total party kill is the acronym. I don't think I've ever done a TPK to an entire party, because that kills the story. It ends the story. You got to remember that in joint storytelling, this is not your story. This is the story of the gamers participating in it. I hate killing player characters. That's the people who have the character sheet and are actually playing the game, because this is their story. I'm facilitating that and filling in the blanks for them so they can have a good time. Now, I'm gonna mess them up and drop orcs and ogres on them, until they're on the brink of collapse. But that it's that breath of relief at the end that I'm trying to get them to, that the feeling of accomplishment and victory. Here's the tale of Eric and the Dread Gazebo. Ed is the dungeon master, the guy running the game, and Eric is one of his games now, or one of his players. Eric is a neutral paladin playing in Ed's game. He was on some lord's land when the following exchange occurred. Ed, you see a gazebo. You see a well-groomed garden. In the middle, on a small hill, you see a gazebo. Eric, a gazebo? What color is it? It's white, Eric. Eric asks, how far away is it? About 50 yards. How big is it? Ed pauses. It's about 30 feet across, 15 feet high with a pointed top. Eric, I use my sword to detect good on it. Ed, it's not good, Eric. It's a gazebo. Eric pauses. I call out to it. It won't answer. It's a gazebo. Eric pauses. I sheath my sword and draw my bow and arrows. Does it respond in any way? No, Eric, it's a gazebo. Eric, I shoot it with my bow. Rolled a hit. What happened? Ed says, there is now a gazebo with an arrow sticking out of it. Eric pauses. Wasn't it wounded? Of course not, Eric. It's a gazebo. Eric whimpers, but that was a +3 arrow. Ed says, it's a gazebo, Eric, a gazebo. If you really want to try to destroy it, I guess you could try to chop it with an axe, I suppose, or you try to burn it, but you don't know. But I don't know why anybody would even try. It's a gazebo. Eric pauses. He has no axe or fire spells. I run away. Ed, thoroughly frustrated, says, it's too late. You've awakened the gazebo. It catches you and it eats you. Eric reaches for his dice. Maybe I'll roll up a fire-using mage so I can avenge my paladin. Characters will do weird stuff in games. Your job is to give them the situation and the setting. And in partnership with them, you let them play in your world. It's like you own the sandbox and you're creating the sandcastles. Yeah, they might knock them down and kick them apart, but that's what sandboxes are for, right? Let me share with you one more thing before I want to get to just a couple of do's and don'ts that I've learned over the years in storytelling, specifically within running games in a variety of different systems. Let me see if I can find the command. Here we go. All right. Here's one other great one. Sometimes you get those opportunities to kind of call an audible when players do something. Let them, because this is a partnership in storytelling. Sometimes you let a player, you take something that they say, and the whole game might just turn on a dime, and it's something else entirely now. Much like this meme. DM, you see a warehouse in the distance. Player, joking, is that like a werewolf, but instead of a wolf, they turn into a house? DM frantically writing stats. It is now. I've encountered many situations like this, and many other people probably have too. And some of the funny moments make for just the best memes that you see. If you look for, Dungeons and Dragons memes are great. Like, I didn't download this one and save it for you to see, but you probably have all seen this one, the one where the whole idea of a critical fail, where you see an orc standing on the edge of a cliff, looking away from you. Like, I roll to push the orc, and you roll a 1, it's a critical miss. Like, you bump into the orc and you gently caress his back. Like, oh no, I roll 1 again, to try to do whatever. It's another 1. I've seen this. I've seen one guy rolled 4 dice in a row trying to act. He was fighting a dragon solo, by the way, because everybody else succumbed to party fear or to dragon fear. Out of 4 rolls, he rolled 3 critical failures. He did not survive, but you just can't let somebody survive off that. But anyway, at the end of the meme, it's like he jumps forward 20 years, and you and the orc have been happily married and have a whole litter of children, and like, it's just hilarious. Take those critical misses and those opportunities, and just, if it gets weird, let it be weird. That's that Monty Python moment. Like, those are the things people remember, and they're fun. Things like attacking a gazebo. Let me see here. The couple of do's and don'ts that I want to make sure I talk about. Always make sure you do this. Make sure that your characters write up a backstory, even if it's just a randomly generated backstory, because that's going to tie them into the story. And remember that the campaign is their story and not your story. I hate it when players don't fill out the character sheet completely, specifically the backstory. I had one kid, he wrote up this detailed backstory, like 2 pages on his character and like his family and how he's kind of on the run from them and what they were. And like, I wound up like going to the place he listed as his homeland, and like there's a big homecoming, and they got like very involved. It had a huge outcome on the end of the of this campaign when we finally tied it up. This was a 1.5-year long campaign that a couple of kids had played. We wound up with I think 32 different players in it, wound up having to break out 3 different very large groups with kids cycling through with adult DMs, and it was a lot of work, but this was a huge collaborative effort between multiple DMs to build this whole new original world that we played in. And I tell you what, kids still talk about it. So I'll bump into kids. This was a couple of years ago, and they're in college now. I'm like, yeah, remember when we played that game and how awesome that was? And some of those things are because we incorporated backstories. So a backstory is an opportunity to hook a character in. And I also tell players, like, if you fill out a good backstory, you have a character shield. It is much less likely that I will do everything as the DM to keep him alive if I've got a whole like story arc pinned on that guy. That's one of the things. Remember that this is your character story. The characters, PCs in the game, they're not merely tools in your story. Let it be theirs, and they'll think that you're the best storyteller ever. That requires more collaboration than many DMs are willing to give. For instance, I was playing in a game, and I still harass the guy about this to this day. He DMs for some kids. He's really good at bringing in new gamers, um, but he does a couple of things that I think you should never ever do. One is that being too restrictive. You've got an idea, and you need to make sure that your gamers get to. We were in an underwater level. I hate underwater levels. Every gamer, why do they make underwater levels? Just don't do it. Somebody call Nintendo. No more water levels. But anyway, so we're in an underwater level, and yes, thank you, TJ. Yeah, just to make us suffer and appreciate the rest of the game. And there's all these merfolk, and we discover while we're in an apparatus of the crab, which is essentially it's a steampunk fantasy submarine. And I have this like we've got some guys that can breathe underwater because of some spells and stuff, and we've got these merfolk that have been infiltrated by doppelgangers, and they're all living in this underground dome. It's very much like the Gungans, right, from the Star Wars, which we don't speak of. And so in these underwater domes, I'm like, all right, guys, this is easy. Like, we're gonna be on to the next section so fast. We gotta find these guys. So I'm like, I take my apparatus of the crab, and I'm gonna crash it through the dome, and we're gonna just drown the whole city. They're underwater people. Everything is subject to getting wet all the time anyway. Doppelgangers can't breathe. Everybody else can. We flood the dome. We save the day, and like it wound up like a 2-hour long shouting match between the DM who would not let me do a very logical. Like I'm like, this is a very logical conclusion. And so in the end, he pulls what Deus Ex Machina. Like, nope, you can't do it because of this and that, and just steps in and overrules what a player wants to do. You can't let somebody play in your sandbox and then tell them how to play with your sandbox. You can't tell them, all right, you can come and sit in the sandbox and look at the sandcastles that I made, but you can't actually contribute anything to it. That will drive a player bonkers. So don't do that. Him and I, we still argue about it. I'm like, no, never, ever. Don't Deus Ex Machina. Nobody, there's a poor choice for any form of storytelling, whether you are writing a book or whether you are DMing a campaign. Don't do it because it takes away all the hard work of the characters, especially if other humans are steering those characters. Tells them that they don't matter. The other one is don't play in the game when you're DMing, because usually then it's going to be like you're going to be very tempted to use your character to force people to go a different direction or to Deus Ex Machina it, either for the sake of your character or whatever. So this same guy has done some of that, and I did some of that when I was a young DM, when I was like back in high school running games because nobody else knew how to tell a good story in our gaming circle. And don't do it though. Go and find other gamers if you need to fill a party, or change the CR level. If you're in Pathfinder, I'm not sure what they call it in D&D, but change the difficulty of the monsters and the situations that they're facing. Nerf stuff if you have to, but don't involve yourself in there because players will resent it. They'll think that, oh yeah, they're just doing it so they can level up or so they can have a good time, and it ultimately detracts from the enjoyment of the players. So that's something I would also recommend you not do. Let that story belong to your players. Don't play in your world as a PC while also DMing. And like you said, don't be afraid to let the humor go. And yeah, that other one, I wrote a note here that I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan. I said, don't do a Tom Bombadil. Tom Bombadil is like Frodo could just give him the ring. Oh, it's over. I saved the day. Tom Bombadil's got it. None of the world applies to him. Try to avoid godlike characters that can just come in and save the day. The whole story is about the PC's struggle to accomplish whatever the task is. So don't rob them of the joy of growth and of overcoming by having some deity level, whether it's you playing it or if it's a PC. Don't bring that in to save the day when it should be their choice. And the same goes, like I said, for writing a story, for writing a screenplay, for creating your own video game. One of my guilty pleasures is those little like clickbait like pages on Facebook, like people telling off their bosses or quitting the worst possible way. I read one the other day. It was worst endings to video games ever. Like people had just hated games, and like a third of those were storylines that just the ending didn't pay off. So you want the ending to have a payoff. Don't just have something else come in and fix all of their problems, because we live in a real world. That's not anybody's reality. So don't try and insert that into the game, because readers and gamers will resent you for it. So I know we've got about 10 minutes left. If you guys have any questions, feel free to unmute your mics. Feel free to raise your hand or turn your screen on. Love to entertain those questions about life, love, the universe, everything in it. 42. Nobody has any questions. Awesome. I won the internet. I won New Ulm Public Library.
All right.
Did it.
I had a question, Christopher. At the beginning, you talked a little bit about world building. Could you maybe return to that a little bit more about like how you get ideas for world creation?
Yeah. So, and I think I talked about this last time you guys had me out, and thanks, by the way, for bringing me back. I'll try harder to alienate you more this time. But so I talked a little bit then about I took existing elements in a story. If you're in a universe that is very common or is a trope, for instance, a fantasy, like just kind of draw some squiggles. This is the land of the humans, and over here are the elves, and here's a mountain, so there must be dwarves. So some of it you base on tropes because we're all fans, right? So everything is an homage in essence. So we draw on the things that influence us, the things that we love. Excuse me. Christopher Paolini is a great example of this with the Inherited series. The Dragon Riders. He is accused of just ripping off all of like his favorite authors and distilling their ideas down into one book. And honestly, it's pretty true. But he did it because he loved those things and he made it his own. So it was also different and it was very similar all at the same time. And you know what? That's okay. That's perfectly fine. You might, people that will accuse him of being a rip-off artist or whatever. He did what he loved. And if you're upset with him for it, you know what? It's just because your book didn't make the kind of money that Paolini's book did, and you don't have the following that Paolini did. But so take the things that you love that inspire you. And I talk a little bit about different things like I believe I talked last time about the topography. Like I kind of draw out what things look like and then establish weather patterns so that I know then what kind of trees are in one spot, what kind of climate and culture in different areas. So you'll know if this wind goes here, that it's going to wind up dumping water here. So we got a rainforest, and then we get different types of forests. And that's if it's a place like Earth. In my Wolves of the Tesseract series, I've got entire dimensions with completely different types of rules. I originally changed some of the ideas, but when I was writing these worlds out initially in what the Tesseract looked like, which is kind of a dimensional filter, which will allow you to go to different realities. They were the same as ours, the same people are there, but all the rules are different and personalities might be different. But like worlds where people were made of living glass, like the rules were that radically different. And like, what does the world look like with that? And there's some authors that have done a great job with things like that. I'm thinking right now of Madeline Alengel, A Wrinkle in Time, where she's traveling through dimensions. That book was honestly, that series was was kind of an influence for the Wolves of the Tesseract. With my sci-fi series, The Decker's Dozen, we've got not just one world, we've got all these other worlds out there, and rules aren't always a constant. So kind of anything can go, but then what you have to do is make sure that your application of a rule is consistent within its boundaries. Like maybe that boundary is on this world, things are like this. And then on this world, things are like this. And this is how they're different. You don't want to confuse those couple of things, because that will readers or gamers will call you on that. And that's kind of the difference in D&D terms, between like Galeria on Pathfinder versus maybe rules set up on something like Ravenloft. And I think Ravenloft is making a comeback. If I recall that, I think they're releasing that for D&D 5.0. So things aren't always the same except for when they are. And the trick is knowing when is when. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thanks.
All right. I think TJ had a question, and he's going to make one up now.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
All right. So let's say you have like some sort of secret society that you kind of want to breadcrumb your players into going into without forcing them into it. Because I kind of accidentally did that. And I just, I'm having issues with the story, and I think about trying to redo it, making it a little bit better, because you've actually given me quite a lot of ideas. But like, how would you actually breadcrumb them into finding it instead of just like, oh, look, here it is, join it, or you can't continue?
That's a great question. There are ways, like you said, to breadcrumb it. And I think you start with the breadcrumbs, and then when people don't pick up on it, because as we've shown some of these memes, sometimes gamers are a little dense. It's okay. Like the next thing I would do would be to make the breadcrumbs a little bigger, and if they still don't get it. And it's great when that's like when you've got some other subplots going on around, and they realize, because as a gamer, when you're doing side quests, that like, I'm not on the main quest. Like there are very subtle and distinct differences between the two, and chiefly being the amount of experience points you're gaining, or whatever kind of advancement tracker that you have, and the type of loot or other sort of tangible rewards that you get as a gamer. They're not as big on the side quests, and so those are little clues as you're completing those, and you're kind of coming back, and you're kind of walking in circles. And when you keep giving them those breadcrumbs, they'll usually get it, but sometimes it does take a little time and a little leading. You can kind of force that. There are ways to kind of force it without it being forced. One of those is I talked about, I think it was Gresgert the Goblin, things where you create a moral quandary for your characters. Now, this only works when you know your gamers, and whether or not this will be an effective strategy. But like the whole idea that, there's they meet a young girl in the market. Let's assume that this is a fantasy world, and they kind of become attached. And this is a great idea if you know it's coming and you have a larger story written out with the world. You kind of create a small bond with her. There's something like, make her sweet. She gives them something, or she acts in some way that endears her to the party, so that you can use her later on if you ever need to force a moral issue where this person has been kidnapped now, and her father comes to you like, she's been captured. I need you to help. This is my only daughter, my only link to my my long dead wife. Please, you guys, you create that link. Like, I need this. She's been captured by these guys, and then you would insert her into that narrative. So it's kind of if you need it, it's kind of a light switch that you can kind of flick that is gonna drive those characters to act like heroes, if they will. My current party of characters, I have 2 out of 5 would be like, we have to do this, and the other 3 would be like, yeah, how does it pay? So that's, too many rogues in the party will do that, but so that's something that you can try. There's also, you can always kidnap them if you're looking for another very direct option where they get kidnapped and indoctrinated for a variety of reasons, which that might be what you tried. Or you could just have characters, like have them start to increase the secret society, start to increase mentions of them. But I think if you restrict everything else to those small side quests, they're going to start to they're going to start to figure it out that, all right, we're not going to get the big fun pieces that we want with the big payoffs until we start exploring this other thing. And I did this just very recently. I mentioned that I was in that my characters are currently playing the Emerald Spire, and almost everything happens in the Emerald Spire. There's some great, very fun side quests, and you need to be in the city of I'm drawing a blank in the name of the city, but you have to go to the city for a couple of very specific reasons. Every now and then for some stuff, and they wound up kind of in the city for like 4 gaming sessions, and part of it was because they didn't want to go back to the Spire, probably because they got their, I mean, they're level 4. I got one person who's a level 6, and they just leveled up into level 5, and they're getting their butt kicked by what should be handled by a group of level 1 gamers. And it's mainly because of they're so loot happy that they're making terrible decisions for financial gain. But they wind up trying to avoid the Spire, the place that they have to go to really to advance the story. And so all they were getting were these small breadcrumbs, these small trails when the breadcrumbs led back to the Spire to finally one of the person who's the tank who's now afraid of the dark was just like, all right, guys, I guess we got to go back to the Spire now. And then they almost got TPK'd by a random encounter in the trees, but that happens. So hopefully that answers your question, and that's kind of what I would attempt.
Yeah, it did. It gave me some ideas as you were talking. I was like, oh, I could have totally done it this way instead of that way, and yeah.
And if you've got those loot happy people, just a straight up bribe. Have somebody be like, yeah, I'm trying to get out of the secret society. If you take over my role, now there is an initiation ceremony, but if you can take over my membership in the Silver Twilight Lodge, I will give you 5 bags of gold, and a Bentley. I mean, whatever it takes to get them to pull that trigger. That's one way in, and that was a little less forced. And then you can drop some details about it and kind of give them some foreshadowing about what it's going to look like. I do think you're right to make the decision theirs and rather than yours. You can lead a horse to water, they say, but you can't make a boat out of the horse and eat tacos out of it. That's the saying, right, Leroy?
That sounds about right. Yeah. Any other questions?
I guess I had a question. Thomas here. I'm coming through okay?
Yeah.
How would you impart nuance to playing an evil character, be it the player character or an NPC? Because I've heard stories from some people about just comically evil ways where player characters dropped that they were evil, like borderline offensive.
Yes, yeah. Evil characters are a bit of a sticky wicket. I tend to not allow characters to be overtly evil. And whenever I do break that, because I enjoy good role playing, people participating in the story. So whenever I do have a character who is overtly evil, I try and keep cohesive rules to my universe. So they almost always get killed very quickly for acting evil. That's the nature of this universe. There are fun ways to do some of that. Like I have one character. He's kind of an occasional sit-in on our games, and he lives inside the beard of a halfling in a very tiny hamster. If you remember Baldur's Gate, the character of Minsk, who has the super, he's a miniature giant space hamster, as Minsk would always say. So he's like that. He's a hamster, but only the person, this person who has this pet hamster can hear the hamster speaking in these fell whispers, trying to convince her to go and to commit horrible acts of atrocity. And so he plays his hamster. I'm like, you basically have 4 hit points, man. Like, don't die. But also at some point you should totally die, because he's actually a demon who brought cupcakes to a party that the other demons didn't like. And so they cursed him to take the form of a hamster. And whenever he's killed, he accidentally, for like 1d4 rounds, resumes his his demon form. He's like a CR12, and he comes out, and for 4 rounds or whatever, just kills everything and almost wiped out the party. It was great. And also, because you only get 4 rounds of that, like there's a bigger story here at play. So that's an example, I mean, of just a crazy evil character. But then there are characters that are not quite as as overtly evil. So you kind of have to live with one foot in that morally gray zone, just so you can relate the character to other characters. It's not an easy thing to do, especially when other characters are not evil. So if you got good characters, they should be at complete and total odds. And the reason why I don't, there's many reasons why I don't typically allow evil players, but players that are good, and I prefer people to be somewhere on the good or neutral spectrum. Players that are good are going to have to be at odds, especially if you got a paladin in the party. The paladin is probably within very short order going to say, "Hey guys, it's either me or that guy," and that's just the dynamic nature of the ranking spectrum for that, and it should be. So don't let a character that's in there destroy that. But also, there should be some antagonism. So if it's an NPC, maybe who you have to follow, you hire as a group of neutral and good characters mixed, and you're on this party quest towards somewhere. But to get there, you need a guide to lead you, and the guide is chaotic evil. He's kind of your Gollum leading you into Mordor, and you're following him. Like, a great way would be something like that evil character, because there is going to be antagonism, and you should expect that. Could be trying to corrupt the neutral characters, finding that 1 foot in the gray, like, hey, you get like those, you don't always get along with those, those lawful good types over there. There's a lot more loot over on my side of the moral spectrum. Like, have them try to actively lead the others astray and live within that tension and the chaos. Use it to your advantage, but also try not to make it destroy the story ultimately. So nerf what you have to nerf. I always recommend you roll behind the screen as much as you can when you're trying to guide it. When things are a little less dicey, then you roll in the front. And when things, if when it's your first person who's on the verge of death, roll in front of the screen. And it will terrify your players, especially and whenever I roll for crits, either for crit successes, I always roll those in the front, because you want your players to trust you. And if you keep cohesive rules, especially in regards to morality and that spectrum of how the good and evil characters interact, your players will trust you more for it.
All right.
Awesome.
Some stuff to think about.
Okay. Any other questions, guys? Well, we're a little bit over time here. We had a couple people that were able to had to leave a little bit early. But again, thank you very much, Christopher, for joining us. We really appreciate your time and all the great insights and stories that you've shared. Some fun memes this evening. And we'll hopefully get to do something again with you soon. So you have
anytime, bring me out. Bring me out to the Red Dragon. I will bring out a crap ton of dice. And if you guys want to try some SFR Dragon dice, I will bring armies for everybody. We can roll some dice. If you ever want to bring out a guest DM or something, just let me know. I enjoy hanging out with you guys, and you're just far enough to be inconvenient and just close enough for me to wish it weren't so.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and have a good night, everybody.